When people play fair, power is predictable. Rules exist. Outcomes make sense. But the moment someone lies, manipulates, or sabotages, the world you know disappears. Most men freeze not from weakness, but from expecting a world that no longer exists. Machiavelli warned, the deadliest enemy is to the one who attacks openly it. It's the one who smiles while quietly poisoning the ground beneath your feet. The urge to defend, explain, prove yourself, that is exactly what they want. React, and you hand them control. Stay silent and watch them destroy themselves. Niccolo Machiavelli warned that the most dangerous enemy is never the one who attacks openly. It is the one who smiles, agrees, and quietly poisons the ground beneath your feet, slowly enough that you doubt your own footing. This is where panic begins. You feel the urge to explain, to clarify, to prove you are clean. That urge is the trap. The moment you react emotionally, you hand them control. The moment you appeal to fairness, you admit weakness in an unfair game. Every word you speak in defense tightens the noose they prepared in advance. This is not a lesson in cruelty, it is a lesson in survival. Power in these moments is not force, it is restraint. It is the ability to control the frame while they expose themselves inside it. To let their aggression grow louder, messier, and more obvious. While you remain silent, composed, untouchable, you do not destroy them. You let them do it for you, and they go dirty. The most dangerous impulse you will feel is the need to respond immediately. To clarify, to correct, to defend your name before damage spreads. This impulse feels rational, even responsible, but it is precisely what your opponent is counting on. Speed is not neutral, speed is leverage. The person who forces urgency controls the psychological terrain. They deny you perspective and push you into their frame. From that moment on, you are no longer acting, you are reacting. And reaction is weakness disguised as activity. Delaying your response does not mean indecision, it means dominance. Silence creates symmetry. While they are exposed, talking, pushing, escalating, you are unreadable. This imbalance generates anxiety in the aggressor. Dirty players rely on momentum. Without it, they begin to overplay their hand. They repeat accusations, they exaggerate, they contradict themselves. Each additional move they make without resistance increases the likelihood of error. This is why restraint is so powerful. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that power lies not in constant action but in timing. To move too early is to act without full visibility. To wait is to see the entire board. Delay allows patterns to surface. Alliances reveal themselves. Motives become obvious. What begins an attack slowly transforms into a confession. There is another advantage to delay. It deprives them of emotional reward. Manipulators feed on reaction, anger, defensiveness, urgency. These signals confirm that their tactic is working. When nothing comes back, frustration sets in. They escalate not because they are strong, but because they are losing control of the outcome. And escalation is dangerous for them. A delayed response also protects your credibility. Calmness suggests confidence. Stillness implies authority. Observers subconsciously trust the individual who does not rush to explain. They assume composure is backed by strength or leverage, even when they do not know why. In contrast, fast explanations often appear rehearsed or desperate, regardless of their truth. Delay does not mean permanent silence. It means responding only when the balance of power has shifted in your favor. When you finally speak, your words land heavier. You are no longer addressing speculation. You are closing a case. By then, the narrative has already begun to tilt, often without your direct involvement. The hardest part of this tactic is psychological discipline. It requires resisting the fear of reputational damage in the short term to secure dominance in the long term. Most people fail here. They trade strategic advantage for temporary relief. But power is never about comfort. When they go dirty, the correct move is not to rush toward clarity. It is to let uncertainty work against them. Delay sharpens your position, weakens theirs, and ensures that when you do act, you do so from above, not from within the chaos they created. In silence, you gather leverage and patience. You win without striking. The moment an accusation is made, most people instinctively defend themselves. They deny, explain, justify, clarify. This feels logical. It feels honest. It feels necessary. It is also exactly what the attacker wants. Defense is not neutral. Defense accepts the premise that there is something to answer for. The instant you defend, you step inside their frame. and inside their frame you are already losing. Reframing is the opposite of defense. It does not argue facts. It changes what the situation is about. Dirty players do not attack truth. They attack perception. They introduce doubt, then wait for you to validate it by responding seriously. Every explanation you offer strengthens the idea that the accusation deserved oxygen. Even a perfect defense still signals vulnerability. Powerful people are not expected to explain themselves. This is why reframing is deadly. Instead of answering what they said, you expose why it was said. You shift attention from the accusation to the motive behind it, not through confrontation, but through implication, tone, and strategic redirection. You let others ask the questions you refuse to dignify. For example, rather than denying an allegation, you might comment on timing or patterns, or the sudden urgency of the claim. This subtly forces observers to evaluate the accuser instead of you. The spotlight moves without resistance. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that power belongs to the one who defines reality, not the one who argues inside it. A ruler who defends looks unsure. A ruler who reframes looks untouchable. This is not arrogance. It is authority signaling. Reframing also creates cognitive friction. The aggressor expects resistance. When it does not arrive, their script collapses. They often escalate, clarify too much, or grow emotional. Each of these reactions further weakens their position. Meanwhile, you remain composed, detached, and observant. Another advantage, reframing preserves optionality. Once you defend, you are locked into a specific narrative and timeline. Reframing keeps you fluid. You can later address facts if necessary, but now on your terms when the environment is no longer hostile. Observers matter more than attackers. Most reputational damage occurs not from the initial claim, but from how it is handled. Calm reframing signals confidence to third parties. It suggests you are operating from a higher vantage point, unconcerned with noise. People instinctively align with that energy. This tactic requires restraint and discipline. You must tolerate temporary ambiguity. You must resist the urge to set the record straight immediately, but clarity achieved too early is often clarity achieved on someone else as terms. When they go dirty, never rush to prove innocence. Innocence is assumed by power. Guilt is implied by defense. Reframe the situation. Let intent surface. Allow others to draw conclusions without being pushed. You do not win by answering the accusation. You win by making the accusation irrelevant. Facts feel powerful, but they are rarely decisive. Narrative is. When people go dirty, they do not aim to disprove reality. They aim to define it. They choose the angle, the language, the emotional tone, and the timing. If you step in swinging facts alone, you are already late. Facts without narrative are raw materials. Whoever frames them first decides how they are understood. This is why controlling the narrative is more lethal than winning argument. A narrative answers one question before any facts are processed. What is this really about? Incompetence, betrayal, insecurity, timing, jealousy, politics. Once that meaning is set, every detail that follows will be interpreted to support it. Humans do not evaluate information neutrally. They search for coherence with the story already in place. Dirty players know this. They leak partial truths, suggest motives, and let implication do the work. If you rush into correct details, you confirm their frame. You appear defensive, technical, and reactive, while they appear intuitive and confident. The correct move is to seize interpretation, not evidence. You do this by defining context before content. Instead of disputing claims, you establish the lens through which those claims should be viewed. Timing, pattern, incentives, history. You invite observers to ask, why now? Who benefits? What does this resemble? Once those questions are alive, facts realign themselves around your frame. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that power is sustained not by being right, but by being believed. A ruler who controls meaning controls loyalty, patience, and judgment. This is not manipulation for its own sake. It is defense against those who already manipulate. Another advantage of narrative control is tempo. Facts demand immediate rebuttal. Narratives unfold. They buy time, shift attention, and allow the aggressor's behavior to become part of the story. As they push harder to be believed, they often supply the very evidence you never had to present. Importantly, narrative control does not require lying. It requires selection. You decide which elements deserve emphasis and which remain background noise. You decide what is central and what is incidental. This selectivity is what authority looks like. Observers matter here more than opponents. Most people are not judging truth. They are judging composure. The individual who appears to understand the situation at a higher level, who speaks less about details and more about meaning, wins trust by default. There is discipline involved. You must resist the temptation to correct every inaccuracy. You must tolerate moments where the surface story feels uncomfortable, but discomfort is temporary. Narrative ownership is durable. When you control the narrative, facts stop chasing you. They line up behind you. You are no longer answering accusations. You are explaining the situation, and the one who explains the situation decides how it ends. When people go dirty, your instinct will be to stop the damage early, to shut it down, to confront, to correct. That instinct feels protective, but strategically it is premature. Escalation is not your enemy. Escalation is your evidence. Dirty players rarely intend a single strike. Their power comes from momentum. One lie invites another. One manipulation requires reinforcement. If you interrupt too early, you deny them the opportunity to expose themselves fully. You also signal fear, proof that their pressure is working. The disciplined response is restraint. By offering minimal resistance, you create a vacuum. Into that vacuum, they pour more words, more claims, more justification. Each additional move increases complexity, and complexity breeds inconsistency. Small lies require maintenance. Large lies collapse under their own weight. This is where patience becomes lethal. As they escalate, three things begin to happen. First, their tone sharpens. Calm turns into urgency, then aggression. Observers notice this shift instinctively. Second, their story grows unstable. Details change, emphasis moves, contradictions appear. Third, their intent becomes visible. What began as concern reveals itself as control, resentment, or desperation. You did none of this. You simply stayed still. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that enemies defeat themselves when allowed to act freely. Interference is often mercy. Distance is punishment. A man unchecked will reveal his character faster than any interrogation. Letting them escalate also protects your credibility. When you finally respond, if you even need to, it comes after a pattern has formed. You are no longer countering a single accusation. You are addressing a sequence of behavior. Observers are already primed to listen. They have witnessed excess firsthand. Importantly, escalation drains their resources, emotional energy, social capital, credibility. Each aggressive move costs them something. Your stillness costs you nothing. This asymmetry is power. The hardest part is resisting the urge to end it. Ending it early feels clean, but clean endings often leave doubts. Messy self-destruction leaves clarity. When they go dirty, do not rush to expose them. Let them speak. Let them push. Let them overreach. People reveal who they are when they believe no one is stopping them. And once revealed, they cannot go back. Dirty players believe they are clever. In reality, they are repetitive. Manipulation is not creativity. It is habit. People who lie, smear, or sabotage rely on a small set of familiar moves. Those moves have worked before. They reuse the same pressure points, the same timing, the same emotional triggers. This repetition is not a flaw you must expose publicly. It is a weakness you exploit quietly. Predictability turns threat into leverage. The first step is observation without interference. Do not interrupt a pattern by reacting too early. Let it run. Watch when they strike, who they involve, what language they use, how they escalate when resistance is absent. Dirty tactics are rarely random. They follow incentives. Once you understand what they want, attention, control, validation, fear, you can forecast their next move with uncomfortable accuracy. At this stage, you are no longer defending yourself. You are studying a system. Weaponizing predictability does not mean counterattacking immediately. It means positioning yourself one move ahead. If you know they leak information indirectly, you control the environment where leaks lose impact. If they rely on urgency, you slow the process structurally. If they provoke emotional reactions, you present calm so consistent it becomes unsettling. They begin to feel exposed, even if they cannot explain why. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that the most reliable way to defeat an opponent is to know them better than they know themselves. A predictable enemy does not need to be crushed. They need to be guided into their own errors. Anticipation replaces confrontation. There is a psychological shift that occurs when you weaponize predictability. Fear dissolves. Anxiety fades. Once you see the pattern, the threat feels smaller, almost mechanical. You stop personalizing the attack. You realize they are not reacting to you. They are executing a script. And scripts can be disrupted without force. Another advantage is narrative insulation. When you anticipate moves, you preemptively neutralize their effect. By the time their action lands, it feels late, obvious, even embarrassing. Observers sense this mismatch. The aggressor appears reactive, you appear prepared. Power silently changes hands. Do not announce that you see the pattern. Never reveal your read. Let them believe they are unpredictable. Confidence in deception makes people careless. Carelessness accelerates collapse. This tactic requires patience and emotional distance. You must resist the temptation to act on every insight. Power lies not in knowing, but in waiting to use what you know. When they go dirty, do not try to outplay them creatively. You outlast them strategically. Predictability is only dangerous to those who fail to see it. To those who do, it becomes a map. And maps decide outcomes. Direct accusation feels powerful, but it is rarely effective. When you point a finger outright, you harden resistance, trigger denial, and invite counterattack. Dirty players are prepared for confrontation. What they are not prepared for is implication. Indirect redirection is subtler and far more lethal. Instead of accusing, you reposition attention. You guide observers to notice inconsistencies, incentives, and timing without naming them explicitly. The mind fills gaps faster than it accepts instruction. When people arrive at conclusions on their own, those conclusions feel undeniable. This tactic works because blame is not transferred by force. It is discovered. Begin by refusing to center yourself. The moment you argue about your innocence, the frame becomes you versus them. Indirect redirection dissolves this binary. You comment on patterns rather than people, circumstances rather than intent, context rather than claims. The focus quietly shifts away from defending your position to examining theirs. Questions are especially powerful here, not interrogations. Observations framed as curiosity. Interesting timing. That is an unusual interpretation. I'm not sure that aligns with how things usually happen. Each statement is mild on its own, but together they guide attention where it matters. You are not pushing blame. You are allowing gravity to do the work. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that the most durable power is exercised invisibly. A ruler who accuses openly invites rebellion. A ruler who allows others to question on his behalf secures compliance without resistance. Influence increases when force disappears. Indirect redirection also protects you legally, socially, and reputationally. You are not making claims you must later defend. You are not escalating conflict. You remain composed and neutral. If challenged, you can always retreat to observation rather than accusation. This asymmetry keeps you safe while pressure accumulates elsewhere. Another advantage is escalation control. When confronted directly, dirty players can pivot, deny, or counterattack. When blame emerges indirectly, they panic. They over-explain. They volunteer unnecessary details. They attempt to clarify things no one asked about. Each attempt to regain control deepens suspicion. Importantly, this tactic respects the role of observers. Most conflicts are decided not by the two participants, but by the audience watching quietly. Indirect redirection speaks to that audience. It trusts their intelligence. It allows them to connect dots without being told what to think. That trust builds alignment. There is discipline required here. You must resist the satisfaction of exposure. You must tolerate ambiguity. You must accept that resolution may be slower. But slow conclusions are stable conclusions. Once people shift their perception, they rarely shift back. When they go dirty, do not accuse. Do not corner. Do not demand accountability. Create conditions where accountability becomes unavoidable. Let others notice what you refuse to name. Let silence and structure do the accusing for you. Blame that is discovered cannot be deflected. Most people believe power comes from settling things, clearing the air, reaching closure, walking away with mutual understanding. This belief is comforting and strategically disastrous when others play dirty. Resolution favors the aggressor. Dirty players thrive on prolonged engagement. Every discussion gives them opportunities to reframe, provoke, extract emotion, or rewrite the narrative. The longer you stay, the more variables they can manipulate. The moment you seek closure, you signal need. And need is leverage they will exploit. exiting before resolution breaks the cycle. This does not mean storming out or making dramatic declarations. It means disengaging calmly while the situation remains unfinished. Ambiguity lingers, tension remains unresolved. And that tension does not sit with you, it sits with them. Unfinished conflicts are psychologically heavy. The mind seeks completion. When you deny it, you force the other party to carry the discomfort alone. They replay conversations, they second-guess moves. They worry about consequences, you move on. This imbalance is quiet dominance. Niccolò Machiavelli understood that power lies in controlling endings. A ruler who exits unpredictably preserves authority. One who stays until satisfaction is achieved reveals dependency. Leaving without resolution signals that you do not require validation, agreement, or permission. There is also a reputational advantage. Observers notice who remains composed enough to disengage and who keeps pressing for reactions. Persistence begins to look like desperation. Silence begins to look like confidence. Over time, the unresolved nature of the conflict casts doubt on the aggressor, not the one who left. Exiting early also preserves leverage. Once resolution is reached, a story is closed, and closed stories cannot be reshaped. By leaving the situation open, you retain optionality. You can re-enter later from a stronger position or never re-enter at all. Both outcomes favor you. This tactic demands restraint. The urge to have the last word is powerful. Resist it. The last word often weakens the speaker. Power belongs to the one who does not need it. When they go dirty, do not stay to clean the mess. Do not chase understanding. Do not seek closure. Leave while questions remain unanswered. An unresolved ending is not a loss. It is a weight you leave behind for them to carry. When people go dirty, the instinct is to fight alone, privately, defensively, quietly. This feels noble. It is also strategically weak. Power is rarely exercised in isolation. It is amplified through alignment. Silent allies are not supporters you rally publicly. They are observers you influence indirectly. Dirty players assume the conflict is contained between you and them. That assumption is their blind spot. Every manipulation occurs within a social environment: colleagues, peers, bystanders, decision-makers. These people may not intervene, but they are always forming judgments. Your objective is not to convince them loudly. It is to position yourself so they convince themselves. This begins with behavior, not persuasion. Consistency builds allies faster than argument. Calm responses, measured language, predictable professionalism. When others observe you remaining composed while pressure escalates, they begin to contrast. That contrast quietly answers a critical question for them: who appears credible? You do not need to answer it yourself. Selective information sharing matters here. You do not vent. You do not campaign. You offer minimal factual context when appropriate, never emotionally charged, never accusatory. This signals confidence and invites trust. People are far more willing to support someone who does not ask for support. Niccolò Machiavelli understood that power grows when others act in your interest without being instructed. The strongest ruler is not the one with the loudest allies, but the one whose allies believe alignment is their own idea. Silence preserves deniability and increases durability. Silent allies serve three functions. First, they validate perception. When multiple people independently reach similar conclusions, narratives stabilize. Second, they constrain the aggressor. Dirty tactics lose effectiveness when witnesses are alert. Third, they create optional leverage. Support that is unannounced can be activated later or never, depending on what best serves you. Importantly, building silent allies requires restraint. Oversharing destroys credibility. Emotional disclosure creates bias against you. The goal is not sympathy, it is respect. Respect survives scrutiny. Sympathy fades. Time is your advantage here. Manipulators move fast and burn trust. You move slowly and accumulate it. Over time, people begin to distance themselves from volatility and gravitate towards stability. You do not recruit allies. You become the safer bet. There is also protection in this tactic. If the situation escalates formally, your behavior history precedes you. Decisions are rarely made on facts alone. They are made on patterns. Silent allies ensure the pattern associated with you is discipline, not drama. The final discipline is patience. You may never see these allies declare themselves. Often their influence is invisible. A decision delayed, a rumor dismissed, an opportunity preserved. Power does not always announce itself when it works. When they go dirty, do not shout your case. Do not demand loyalty. Do not force alignment. Behave in a way that makes alignment inevitable. Silent allies are not dramatic. They are decisive. And by the time the conflict resolves, you will realize you were never standing alone. Not all dirty players rush for speed. Some rush for visibility. They want reactions, witnesses, recognition. They escalate not because the tactic requires it, but because being ignored feels like suffocation. This is where you gain leverage. The moment you realize they need attention, you stop feeding it. You respond selectively. You acknowledge substance without acknowledging drama. You address outcomes without addressing theatrics. You engage channels, not personalities. This creates a psychological imbalance. They are performing, but no one is applauding. And performers without an audience unravel quickly. This tactic is especially effective because it turns their strength into liability. The more they try to be seen, the more obvious they become. Tone sharpens, language exaggerates. Behavior grows theatrical. Observers begin to sense something is off. Not because you pointed it out, but because excess reveals itself naturally. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that men driven by recognition are easy to manipulate. Vanity accelerates exposure. The one who resists visibility controls the one who craves it. By denying attention, you force a choice. Escalate or retreat. Retreat damages their ego. Escalation damages their credibility. Either way, they pay a cost. You do not. There is also a reputational advantage. When one party remains quiet and procedural, while the other grows louder and more emotional, authority migrates automatically. People trust the figure who does not need to announce power. Importantly, this tactic requires discipline. Silence must be intentional, not passive. You stay engaged where it matters and absent where it does not. You do not ghost. You filter. You do not ignore facts. You ignore provocation. Over time, this creates conditioning. They learn that theatrics produce no leverage. The behavior either stops or becomes self-destructive. In both cases, the threat diminishes without direct confrontation. When they go dirty, ask one question internally. Do they want control or do they want to be seen? If it is visibility, starve it. Do not react publicly. Do not mirror intensity. Do not reward performance. Let them speak into silence, because nothing destabilizes a manipulator faster than realizing they are no longer the center of the room. Dirty players rely on one critical condition: impermanence. They want pressure without proof, implication without trace, damage without accountability. What cannot be revisited cannot be judged. This is where you reverse the advantage. You do not argue the attack, you document it. Converting their behavior into a record transforms power dynamics instantly. Conversations slow down. Language becomes careful. Tone changes. What was once aggressive becomes procedural. People behave differently when they know actions will persist beyond the moment. This is not escalation. It is stabilization. By insisting on written channels, formal processes, summaries, or confirmations, you remove the fog that dirty tactics depend on. Memory gives way to evidence. Emotion gives way to structure. The aggressor must now stand by their words instead of improvising them. Most manipulators hate this. They may resist documentation, mock it, or frame it as unnecessary. That resistance is informative. Clean intentions do not fear records. Only actions that cannot survive review require ambiguity. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that power solidifies when actions are preserved. A ruler who controls the archive controls judgment because judgment is rarely immediate. It is retrospective. Records decide who appears reckless and who appears composed. This constraint forces either retreat or exposure. Both outcomes favor you. Another advantage is future leverage. You may never need to use the record publicly. Often its mere existence is enough. It alters incentives quietly. Behavior improves. Pressure softens. Attacks lose frequency and intensity. Importantly, this tactic is defensive, not vindictive. You are not collecting material for revenge. You are building insulation. Should the situation escalate formally through authority, mediation, or decision-makers, the groundwork is already laid. You are not reconstructing events under stress. You are presenting a timeline. Discipline matters here. Records must be factual, neutral, and restrained. No emotional language. No interpretation. Let sequence speak. Emotion weakens documentation. Clarity strengthens it. When they go dirty, do not rush to confront. Do not rush to explain. Do not rush to expose. Slow the interaction and preserve it. Because once an attack becomes a record, it stops being a weapon in their hands. It becomes a liability in theirs. Dirty players do not operate on logic. They operate on reaction. They provoke not to win an argument, but to extract emotion. Anger, fear, defensiveness, urgency. Emotion is their fuel. It confirms influence. It tells them where to press next. The moment you give it, you surrender inflation and momentum at the same time. Starving them of emotion is not passivity. It is deprivation. Emotional neutrality collapses their strategy because it removes feedback. Without visible reaction, they cannot calibrate pressure. They do not know whether they are winning, losing, or even being taken seriously. This uncertainty destabilizes manipulators more effectively than confrontation ever could. Calm is not silence alone. It is consistency. Your tone stays even. Your behavior remains unchanged. Your routines do not shift. You do not explain yourself more than necessary. You do not mirror their intensity. This steadiness creates a psychological mismatch. They escalate. You remain level. Observers register this contrast instinctively. One side appears volatile. The other appears controlled. That contrast is power. Emotion also distorts judgment, especially your own. Anger narrows options. Fear accelerates bad decisions. Anxiety shortens timelines by starving the interaction of emotion. You protect your strategic bandwidth. You can think, observe, and choose rather than react. Dirty tactics lose potency when they cannot hijack your nervous system. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that authority is signaled through composure. A ruler who appears unmoved communicates security, leverage, and foresight. This is not detachment for show. It is control of the internal state that precedes control of outcomes. Over time, this tactic conditions behavior. People learn that emotional tactics do not work on you. They either adjust to a cleaner strategy or disengage entirely. Both outcomes favor you. Influence remains with the individual who cannot be emotionally moved on command. Power matures quietly. You do not destroy them. You become expensive to attack. Reputation finishes what tactics begin. It converts short-term discipline into long-term protection. Once established, it creates friction for anyone who considers going dirty again. Not because you threaten them, but because history does. Your presence becomes a constant reference. Your calm, measured, unreadable behavior is the barrier against chaos. You no longer react to attacks. You exist above them. You outlast, out-observe, outmaneuver. The world continues, but their efforts collapse in repetition, exposure, and overreach. Your restraint speaks louder than their aggression ever could. Every interaction leaves residue, tone, timing, excess, calm, escalation. While most people are focused on winning the current exchange, others are unconsciously cataloging behavior. They may say nothing, they may stay neutral, but they are watching, and what they see compounds. Dirty players burn out because they cannot sustain control without escalation. You outlast them by being boring, stable, and unreadable. Eventually the fight ends without announcement. You notice fewer challenges, less pressure, more deference. Not because you demanded it, but because people learned. This is how power matures. This is how dominance becomes invisible, inevitable, and permanent. You did not destroy them. You became untouchable. You became the one who others measure by. You became the standard. If this breakdown sharpened how you think about power and conflict, like the video so it reaches others who need it, subscribe for the next lesson. Because in a world where people play dirty, long-term dominance comes from seeing further than everyone.